Capturing a Quiet Beauty. Jaclynn Toh, Du I Ching. Chapter 1. The Chaotic Arrival. It was so loud. Everything was too fast. Anran felt the thought settle in her as if someone had dropped a pebble into a calm pond and then shoved a broom through the water. The city breathed and banged and refused to be gentle. Horns threaded themselves into the air like a metallic braid. Distant engines hummed. A chorus of voices and vendors and motorcycles stitched the street into vibration. In that cacophony, the iron gate of Junye's house looked like an argument made physical. Black, filigree, and geometry, a formal mouth shut against the world. She had rehearsed leaving the train, rehearsed the moment she would set her foot on new pavement, the perfect unclenched smile she would wear until everything felt normal. Rehearsal had lived in her palms like a warm stone. Now, as she stood alone with her suitcase at her feet, the mantras unspooled. Her hands were damp. Her mouth tasted of old breath and the sharp metallic tang of nerves. When she lifted her hand, the bell sounded like a pistol. The tone ricocheted through the bones at the base of her skull and set the blood in her ears to a high, ragged whisper. She had meant to press the brass and step back with polite patience. Instead, the noise detonated inside her, and the waiting that came after, waiting always worse than action, expanded every small sensation into 1,000 pricks of alarm. The door slammed open with the abruptness of someone tearing a page out of a book. He filled the doorway. Junye, larger than the frame, shoulders squared as if life were his to correct by volume. He looked like a man who habitually occupied space. His voice came down like rain on tin. "You're late. Where have you been?" His voice hit her like surf. The words did not invite explanation. They struck. One bow. A tiny ball of energy wrapped in fluffy white and brown fur sit between his legs and whooped into the street. A staccato series of yaps that glittered on top of the other noises and lodged in the soft parts of Anran's ears. Her backpack slipped from her fingers and skittered across the flagstones. It knocked, a meek sound. Then a louder, thin, unforgiving ring of doggy excitement. Her knees folded before she knew it. She crouched with the weight of her luggage like a shield and pressed her palms over her ears, as if she could clamp the world smaller by force of touch. Her palms felt slick. Anxiety slicked across her skin. Breath came in quick, tight fractions. Her hearing became a zoom lens, narrowing to the shrill dog yaps and Junye's thunderous voice and the stubborn metallic echo of the door. "Stop!" Anran's voice came thin and muffled even to her own ears. "It's too loud." The words were urgent and terrifying in their smallness, but they were all she could set loose. Junye's face changed in a way she had not anticipated. The anger melted away into confusion, then shame, honest and heavy. He glanced down at the discarded leash lying in the dust. The household thunder became something ashamed. "One bow, where is he going?" he muttered, and then was gone, his rubber sneakers hitting the pavement with resounding thuds as he bounded down the street, leaving the gate open like an accusation. Anran's chest eased in a small, shameful way and then contracted again. His absence did not quiet everything. The city resumed its roar, and the dog's yaps tossed off into the evening like a bright string. She pressed her forehead to her forearms, palms still over her ears, and let a quiet, helpless sound leak out. "I never should have come here," she thought, the thought a small, certain stone sinking into the soft dark of her chest. Chapter 2. The Quiet Helper. Relief arrived. like cooling embrace of a large tree against the blazing sun, and it took human form of a person, another large human male, crouched in front of her, silent like a shadow and just as quiet. Junye did not move with the velocity of the city. He approached as if the world were a series of fragile instruments, and he intended to touch only what would not shatter. His footsteps were polite, not believing in making announcements. He crouched a careful distance away and smiled like a practiced lullaby, warm, understated. "It's okay," he said, voice low and measured, deep and calm. "I'm Junye, Junye's friend. Let's get you off the floor and somewhere quiet. If you want, we can help look for the dog." Those words were a salve, unspooling the knots of tension that had built up in her panic, leaving her limp as a deflated balloon. And somehow, Junye sensed her weakness. She let him lift her up, limbs clumsy and grateful, and he guided her behind the low shadow of a hedgerow where the city's edges felt less jagged. Under his small attentiveness, the humiliation of kneeling and the leaking panic subsided to manageable tremors. Across the street, Junye ran like a man pursued by his own guilt. He moved in a rush of ragged breaths and flailing apologies, his voice a strip of flint sliding against rock. With each block, he called Wanbao's name like an accusation and a plea. "Wanbao, Wanbao," his hands were frantic, swinging, striking strangers' doors in his anxiety. He imagined every possible failure, losing control of the dog, losing the evening's dignity. But mostly he felt a sharp, corrosive self-loathing. Why had he let his temper rise? Why had his voice been a gunshot instead of a soft word? "Should we help look for Wanbao?" Anran asked timidly. "After all, it was my fault that he escaped." Junye laughed softly. "Don't let that little monster fool you. His other name is Harry Houdini. He escapes at least twice a week, and I can prove it." Junye held out his hand, then walked beside Anran, showing her all the possible spots Wanbao liked to visit. He pointed out benches hidden beneath the sweep of elms and a side alley where the evening crowded away like a shy animal. "Sometimes he likes to nap under that tree," he said, tone steady, and Anran let a laugh escape that was almost a sob. The park he described was a palette of pastel-colored blooms and lush greenery, sunlight that fell in warm ribbons, a fountain that breathed slowly. Junye's frantic search found the wrong notes. He asked people too loudly, barged into a shop without thinking, nearly knocked over a cyclist. Every amplified move pushed his chest into a tightening knot. He was large and loud, and clumsy, in a way that had once suggested strength. Now, it felt like a liability he could not escape. They found Wanbao curled beneath an old palm tree, as if the dog knew better than humans how to choose shelter. When Anran reached out, he lifted his head and sniffed her hand. The contact was small and sacred, a soft waft and then a lick at her knuckle. Anran's shoulders went slack for the first time all evening. The fretful music inside her chest decrescendoed. Junye arrived out of breath, an awful mixture of hope and shame radiating from his entire being. He saw his dog safe and breathed, relief like a tide. Then he saw Anran's hand at the dog's ear. He had expected gratitude, or at least a neutral acceptance. Instead, he saw a body subtly shifting, a step behind another person, a tacit withdrawal. He thought his frantic rescue would be interpreted as care. Rather, it came off as panic and performance. The idea lashed at him. I angered her. I scared her. Anran rested against Junye, and for a moment the world steadied. She trusted the softness of his silence more than the thundering urgency Junye had offered. It was not that Junye had not tried. He had, but his attempt had been a storm, and storms did not heal what storm had broken. Her relief was a quiet bloom. She let it settle without guilt. Chapter 3. The Dog's Confession. Across the threshold of that small park, truth laid itself plain as a staged prop. Junye's chest ached with a bruising mixture of regret and wanting. He watched as the dog, who he owned and loved and feared at once, took 2 tentative steps toward him, then recoiled. Wanbao's choice fell like a verdict. He passed Junye and sought the warmth of Anran's hands. An omniscient thread could see the small disasters happen before they read as such to the characters. Junye's internal monologue was a jagged stream of panic and shame. I raised my voice. God, why did I yell? I thought I was helping. He felt the weight of not being chosen even by a pet that lived on treats and naps. The rejection scoured him. It sliced cleanly down the middle. He had been loud, he had been fast, and now the dog himself preferred quiet. The little canine preference hung between them like a sign. Anran's reaction was predictably human. She stepped a hair behind Tianyi's shoulder as if the pair of them made a single unit of shelter. Her body did not make proclamations. It performed small, necessary acts. She smoothed Wanbao's fur, angled herself so the dog could nestle into her lap. Action communicated what she had yet to say aloud. I need safety. I need quiet. Tianyi, who had the patient architecture of reliability, looked at Junye and offered no gloating. He only handed back the leash with gentle practicality and kept a protective, nonchalant gravity that did not shout victory. He acted like someone who understood that people were not prizes to be won with noise but lives to be considered respectfully. Junye felt his chest hollow like a room with the lights out. This moment, simple and almost comic when observed from outside, became a private crucible. He thought of all the times his loudness had made people step back rather than step forward. He heard in the retreating clip of Anran's breath the quiet verdict that would shape things ahead. She wanted someone who made storms feel optional. When Anran said, without raising her voice, soft and certain, I need safety, I need quiet, the sentence landed with the heavy clarity of a bell. It was not malice, it was clarity, a sober inventory of her needs. For Junye, the sound of the words was devastating and instructive. He stood with the taste of loss as both admonition and motivation. Chapter 4. The Blended Tension. Dinner felt like a theater of manners with the stage lamps turned up too bright. The table was a rectangle of uneven social acts. Anran folded small and careful at one corner. Junye occupied another with restless volume. Tianyi remained an easing presence across from her. Tianwen sat like a judge in a pullover, eyes sharp as a pair of well-used scissors, while her mother and Junye's father sat like silent judges presiding over a rather contentious court case. Tianwen watched the room as if measuring the pitch of a violin. She noticed Junye's hands, habitually large, always ready for action, and the way his voice filled spaces without being invited. She catalogued Tianyi's calm in the same breath, noting the tiny, almost unconscious ways he deflected and softened. Her internal thoughts were roses with thorns. She saw the pattern that others dodged. You can't fix what you can't see, she thought, and then added, they don't see what they do to others. The conversation was thin-skinned at times. Junye's anecdotes landed loud, the kind of bravado that once conjured admiration but now read as performance. He made a joke about campus that jarred with Anran's twitch. She folded inward and kept small. Junye kept adjusting the conversation to gentle orbital tracks. Books, dorm layouts, the odd charm of a quiet cafe. His manner was an offering, low energy, high consideration. "You two are exhausting," Tianwen observed dryly, stirring a spoon in official vexation. It was not mean so much as accurate. She folded her arms, then leaned forward and asked the question that would press the table's raw nerve. "Anran, who do you prefer? The loud boy or the quiet one?" The room stilled as if someone had dimmed the lights. Anran's eyes darted between the two men. Junye, noisy, exuberant, and chaotic. He was used to commanding and letting the world know in no uncertain terms when her was not happy. Tianyi, on the other hand, was calm, measured, and understanding, a voice that did not raise in panic, an inclination to listen instead of to fill silence. Her answer was a thing of slow self-realization. She did not declare it aloud. She let her attention rest on Tianyi for a heartbeat too long. Her inner voice, unadorned, answered the question the way a person listens to a need. Tianyi is kind. Junye is chaos. The verdict settled in the room like dust after a dropped glass. Junye's reaction was physical and involuntary. His fist thumped the table, not loud, but a percussion that registered within him like a drumbeat of defeat. He knew the answer had been given without his consent. Tianwen, with a tight-lipped half-smile, leaned back as if she had planned the test, and the result was pleasingly instructive. The dinner carried on, but it had unrolled a private map of futures. Anran's preference had been positioned. Junye had been told, without spectacle, that his default temperament had consequences. Tianyi remained quietly present, unaware of the degree to which a private smile had just been gifted to him. Chapter 5. The date is on. Later that evening, Tianyi looked around the living/dining room. "Where are the rest of your bags? Do you need any help unpacking?" "I didn't bring much stuff because I will be staying at the dorm. In fact, I will be moving there next week," Anran responded quietly. His casual response struck Junye like a bullet to the chest. "What? Why? No one told me anything about that." "It's just quieter and more convenient for classes and stuff," Anran stammered, her anxiety building again. Tianwen crossed her arms and delivered what passed for surgical honesty in their house. "It's no wonder," she said, with a twist and a brittle amusement. "Junye, you are like a tornado, all loud and blustery. How can she not be afraid of you? You are too loud for her to even think." Her words struck the air, sharp and crisp. They held the quiet cruelty of truth dressed as observation. Junye flinched as if struck. That phrase, "noisy puppies," arched over him like a public diagnosis. He felt exposed. His methods were being named and his intention misread. His anger folded into something smaller and more persistent. Shame. He paced a little, trying to reconstruct where his instinct had begun to break things. Tianyi, in contrast, offered an invitation that was soft as a key, opening a small door. "How about we go for a tour of the city tomorrow night?" he asked Anran, in a voice that moved like water. There was no show of bravado, no sweeping gesture, just a hand extended in a modest, ordinary way. Anran accepted with a slight nod and a light smile. "Wait, what? No, she's not going anywhere with you. Anran is my sister," Junye shouted. "That's enough, Junye," his father interjected sternly. "Your sister can do whatever she likes." The time limit hummed in the background like a countdown. She would leave soon. Decisions pressed tighter. Junye's failure to self-contain would be repeatedly revealed. Tianwen's insight had forced the rules into the open. The window was small, and the stakes were private but real. Junye had to change or lose ground. The notion that someone might teach him a softer way of interacting sat like a foreign coin in his mouth. He tried to bargain with himself that night, practicing quiet, whispering apologies into his pillow, trying to feel how a subdued voice might hold weight. But old habits are stubborn beasts, and loudness had always been his muscle for taking care. Tianwen's verdict was both catalyst and knife. He could be better. He did not yet know if better could mean quieter. Chapter 6. The Date and the Spy. The next day, being with Junye was like walking in a bubble. The noise and confusion of the busy neighborhood was dialed all the way down to a level that seemed normal, even to Anran. The garden where they found Wanbao felt like a music video, where the color saturation had been dialed up and all the edges were soft, neon petals, fountains that blinked like soft LEDs, benches that sat like stages. Anran walked with a small contentment she had not allowed herself since coming to the city. Tianyi's hand brushed lightly against a sleeve, and the gesture felt less like a claim than like an anchor. From behind a hedge, Junye skulked. He had donned a ridiculous disguise. Sunglasses that reflected too much, a baseball cap pulled low. For a man who usually announced his presence in advance, Mr. Stealth was absurd. His inner monologue sounded like frantic punctuation. I can do this. If I can make one perfect move, she'll see I can be quiet too. He crawled nearer, crouching like a cartoon spy, and for a moment he felt like he inhabited a different genre, slapstick instead of romance. Then fate and bad timing collaborated. A sprinkler head, flush with the footpath and almost invisible, betrayed him. One step, a crunch of gravel, a hiss water rose with theatrical force. Junye stood in a sudden geyser that baptized him into humiliation. Hat skewed, sunglasses sliding, clothes saturated and clinging. Junye reacted in his usual manner, loudly. Damn it, who the hell? The park laughed in the small, sharp sounds of surprised gasps. Anran flinched. Junye's raised voice combined with the cold sprinkles of water and the flashes of light reflecting off the spray of water like diamonds shattered her peaceful bubble in an instant. The spray and the sight of wet fabric triggered an involuntary revulsion. Water slapping fabric, the sensation of being out of control. Junye moved by instinct and planted himself between her and the spectacle. Attention, a protective hand. What the hell, Junye? Get lost, he said, voice low and furious on Junye's misadventure. It was not the angry sermon of earlier. It sounded instead like a serious boundary, drawn quietly but firmly. Junye, damp and ridiculous, scuttled away, dignity leaking like the puddles he left behind. The humiliation burned. He felt comic and catastrophic in equal measures. The episode confirmed a vexing truth. Attempts at stealth for him were clumsy and only amplified the noise he tried to contain. Tianwen had been right in her cold observation. Junye's interference escalated chaos rather than curbing it. He had tried to be helpful and been ridiculous. Anran's flinch at the sprinkler was evidence enough that his methods still unsettled her. The humiliation swelled and then condensed into something he would have to carry home. Being loud had consequences. Chapter 7. Counsel from the Insider. Realizing he had hit a wall in trying to gain favor with Anran, Junye reluctantly invited Tianwen for tea and sympathy the next day. He hit rock bottom with theatrical timing. He needed a fresh perspective, a helping hand, cheat codes. Tianwen found him in the neighborhood cafe, hunched over a bench and replaying the sprinkler incident like a film that refused to end. She did not do coddle or sentimental speeches. "How do I stop Tianyi?" he asked her almost mournfully, channeling Wanbao with his big puppy dog eyes. Tianwen let out a deep, exasperated breath. Boys were trouble to begin with and impossible to handle when depressed, she thought to herself. She did not offer vague encouragement. Her voice cut like a clean-edged blade. "You don't stop being him by shouting less. You need a plan." She scribbled on a scrap of paper with the economy of someone who gives commandments to children and expects compliance. Her note carried rules like armor, short, precise. Then she added, almost as a dare disguised as advice, max 10 words. Junye read it like a map that required translation. 10 words, a discipline in brevity. It was less a rhetorical constraint and more a behavioral gauntlet. He stared at the ink until the letters blurred. Could he become a man who measured not by volume, but by the weight of what he did? Tianwen's face was stern and blunt. "You need to stop with the stunts, the antics, stop the theatrics. Anran won't respond to that. Worse, she will just shut down if she feels overwhelmed. Be useful, be small, be consistent," she instructed. Her words did not lecture so much as issue orders. Under the brittle light of the library, his defeat was quiet and humbling. He practiced curtailed sentences in his head like a mantra. "I help. I stand. I watch. I hold." He tried them aloud and felt each word as a manual strain on muscles used to shouting. The notepad with the list of rules became a totem in his pocket. He touched it as if it were a scripture and felt both the absurdity and the thrill of the task. He would follow it. He had to. The desperation in him had a new flavor, terrified determination. He could be smaller, he told himself. He would be smaller, and perhaps she would see that smallness as strength. Chapter 8. The Silent Guide. The rest of the week passed without incident. Junye was consciously controlling his interaction with Anran, limiting his words and instead practicing patience and calmness in his approaches. When registration day came around, he scrambled for the chance to help Anran with hers, knowing fully well the absolute madness and chaos that would ensue. The university registration hall was a screaming vortex of sound. The echo of 1,000 panicked students bounced off the tile floor, assaulting Anran's senses. She immediately flinched, instinctively lifting a hand to cover her ear. She braced herself for the inevitable shout from Junye. Instead, she felt his presence shift beside her. Not the usual explosive energy, but something carefully contained. When she glanced up, his jaw was clenched so tightly she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. His hands, normally gesticulating wildly, were rigidly controlled at his sides. "Control it," Junye's mind screamed at him. "Don't be the chaos she's already drowning in." Every instinct in his body wanted to barrel through the crowd to clear a path with his voice and his shoulders. Instead, he forced his breathing to slow, his movements to become deliberate. The effort felt like trying to contain a wildfire with his bare hands. "Follow me. Keep your hands free," he said quietly, each word carefully measured. Anran blinked in surprise. She'd never heard Junye speak so softly, never seen him move with such calculated precision. He positioned himself like a human shield, using his broad frame to part the crowd without aggression. His steps were slower than his natural pace, creating pockets of relative calm in their wake. The crowd pressed against them, backpacks swinging, elbows flying, voices shrieking about course schedules and housing assignments. But somehow, in the bubble Junye created around her, Anran could breathe. She watched the rigid line of his shoulders, the way he absorbed impacts meant for her without even flinching. This is killing him, she realized with startling clarity. He's fighting every natural impulse. Junye! A high-pitched, bubbly, girly voice cut through the noise like a blade. Jingy materialized from the crowd, her sidekick Shadow, BFF Meili close behind, both girls wearing high-fashion, designer baddie uniforms, long hair in a high ponytail, crop tops, short shorts, and stacked sandals, faces made up to look natural and fresh with glossy lips and fluttery fake lashes. We've been looking everywhere for you. Anran felt her stomach clench, waiting for Junye to transform back into his usual animated self. Instead, she watched something extraordinary happen. His entire body went still, not relaxed, but coiled like a spring under maximum tension. His eyes flicked once toward the girls, then deliberately back to her. Choose, his internal voice demanded, chaos or calm, them or her. Without a word, he turned his back on Jingy's pout and Meili's manufactured moo. The dismissal was so complete, so utterly unlike his usual people-pleasing nature, that Anran felt something shift inside her chest. He leaned slightly toward her, his voice barely audible above the din. Dorm office next. Quiet route? 4 words left. The count pounded in his skull like a heartbeat. Every fiber of his being wanted to explain, to fill the silence with reassurances and jokes and the comfortable noise that usually defined him. Instead, he bit down on his tongue so hard he tasted copper. Anran looked up at him. Really looked, taking in the strain around his eyes, the careful way he held himself, the deliberate sacrifice he was making. For the first time since they'd entered the building, her shoulders relaxed. A smile spread across her face, genuine and warm. Lead the way. The simple trust in her voice hit Junye like a physical blow. Worth it. Every agonizing second of restraint, every swallowed word, every moment of fighting his own nature, worth it for that smile. Even knowing he couldn't sustain this performance much longer, even knowing this careful composure would eventually crack, he felt something dangerously close to satisfaction bloom in his chest. Just a little further, he promised himself, already calculating the quietest path to their destination. Chapter 9. The Final Effort. Registering Anran for her dorm room was a breeze. Fortunately, he and Tianyi had worked their campus connections to get Anran and Tianwen the same dorm apartment. But getting to their apartment and her stuff moved in was another matter altogether. Thankfully, registration day allowed for cars to be driven on campus right up the entrance of the dorm apartment blocks, as long as they were not left unattended. But this meant that Anran would have to carry her stuff up to her unit on her own. When Junye and Anran arrived at the Anran's dorm, they could see Tianyi leaning against his car. It was apparent that he had just arrived to drop Tianwen off and had stayed to wait for them. At the curb outside the dorms, the final competition read like a low-key duel. Tianyi with his rehearsed small attentions, Junye with his labored practical service. Tianyi presented a pressed flower lamination like a bookmark of calm, words chosen with the same quiet care. "I hope you like your room," he said, hand extended lightly. The gesture was intimate and small. Junye did not try poetry. He slid a small map across with tidy annotations, study spots, quiet cafes, a flower shop he'd noticed. The map was a pragmatic love letter. "I can tend your world." Anran watched both offerings like a person inspecting two possible doors. Jianyi's gesture was personal and intimate. Junye's service, while quiet, was impersonal functional. It was the difference between someone who noticed what you needed before you asked and someone who offered something useful after the fact. She gently took the map and carefully slipped it into the outer pocket of her backpack. "This is as far as we go," Junye said, pointing to the "No Boys Allowed" sign posted at the main gate. "Are you sure you have everything?" "Yes, I don't need much," she responded as she strapped on her backpack and started dragging her suitcase towards the doorway. "Don't forget to call home once you're settled, and come home on the weekends," Junye reminded her. Tianyi watched the retreating pair with the pressed flower folded in his palm. It was a small contraction of disappointment. He had intended charm and calm as a different kind of care. Junye had used service as proof of change. The choice was practical. Anran's mind, pragmatic and honest, favored what would get her inside and safe at that minute. Chapter 10, The Fall. Stairs are where attention and gravity meet and sometimes conspire against the unprepared. Anran's suitcase complained on the edge of each step, the wheels grinding like a small protest. She had both hands on the handle, concentrating on a measured breath, counting each tread like a child learning to run. Anran adjusted her grip on the heavy suitcase handle, focused only on the final landing. She felt a profound, exhausting relief. The noise of the city and the tension of Junye's house were finally behind her. Just a few more steps. That's when two silhouettes detached themselves from the alcove by the wall. The silence in the hallway felt suddenly oppressive, broken only by the soft scrape of designer heels against polished floor. Junye emerged first, her perfectly styled hair catching the dim overhead light, followed closely by Mei Li, whose glossy lips curved into a predatory smile. Well, Junye's voice sliced through the quiet like glass. "Look what we have here, the little village girl finally crawling back to her proper place." They positioned themselves deliberately, blocking the narrow stairway that led to the lower floors. Anran's fingers tightened reflexively around the suitcase handle, her gaze dropping immediately to the worn leather grip. The familiar weight of shame settled over her shoulders like a heavy cloak. "Did you have a nice little adventure playing princess?" Junye continued, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "I heard Tianyi was kind enough to carry your pathetic little bag. How charitable of him." Anran's breathing became shallow, measured. She focused on the brass buckle of her suitcase, counting the small scratches in the metal. If she made herself small enough, quiet enough, maybe they would lose interest. Maybe they would disappear like bad dreams always did. But Mei Li stepped closer, her voice a poisonous whisper. "You really think you deserve them, don't you? Two of the most sought-after boys in school, and somehow they notice you." She laughed, the sound sharp and cruel in the empty hallway. What could they possibly see in someone so ordinary, so beneath them? The words hung in the air like smoke. Anran remained motionless, her entire world narrowed to the texture of leather beneath her palm and the pattern of scuffs on her worn shoes. Mei Li's frustration crackled visibly. "Look at me when I'm talking to you. She thinks she's too good to even acknowledge us now," Junye snarled, her composure finally cracking. After everything, the shove came without warning. Junye's manicured hands connecting hard with Anran's shoulders. Already off balance from the heavy suitcase, Anran stumbled backward toward the top step, her arms windmilling desperately as gravity claimed her. The crash echoed through the dormitory like thunder, followed by the sharp clatter of the suitcase tumbling down the stairs. Chapter 11. The Rescue and the Choice. They arrived almost together but with different rhythms. Junye hurtled in first, breathless and raw with instinct. His hands shook with the kind of panic that makes a man clumsy only in his attempts to be delicate. "Anran, are you hurt? Don't move. I'm sorry." His voice was high and cracked like porcelain reassembled. Tianyi reached the scene in 3 measured steps. He did not shout. He did not make proclamations. He knelt with slow purpose. "Security has been called," he said in a voice that conducted, ordered, and calmed. "Tianwen, stabilize her head. Junye, step back, you're shaking." Junye withdrew his hand like a man who had realized his hands carried earthquakes. He wanted to be everything at once: apology, support, competence, but his adrenaline made his fingers tremble. His knuckles were white, and the concern slick with panic that made each touch risky. Anran's eyes opened and saw it. They found Junye and then found Tianyi. In that split second, realization condensed like a light bulb turning on. Junye's nature, his instinct was that of exuberance, energetic and loud. He was not mean, he was not arrogant, he was just him. Tianyi, on the other hand, was like flowing water, a gentle force of nature that had a calm energy. With that, she knew her choice. She pushed Junye's trembling hand away from her shoulder, not in accusation, but as a practical decision. She leaned slightly toward Tianyi's steadier shape and nodded minutely, just enough to say, "Take charge." Tianyi did so without flourish. He placed a hand on her forehead, checked her pulse, spoke in measured cadences to the arriving responders. His instructions were precise. His touch was as if a metronome had been set on empathy. The room organized. Junye folded against the steps like a receding storm. He had arrived with another natural instinct to act loud and fast. The crisis demanded calm competence, and the world's small vote had favored it. As Anran was loaded and prepped for care, Junye watched his hopes and dramatic instincts collapse into the simple humiliation of being inadequate. There was neither villainy nor melodrama, only a raw, honest ache. In his chest he felt the hollow of acceptance. He had scared her. He had become a hazard to the comfort she needed. Chapter 12. The Double Vow. Clinic light is a cool, clinical forgiveness. The room smelled of antiseptic and warm plastic, and the slow, patient rhythm of recovery. Days later, under softer lighting and with gathered faces stitched around the bed, Junye walked forward with an air of practiced humility. He did not make a scene. He did not attempt a cavalier boast. He placed both hands on the edge of a chair and forced a steadying breath. "I am sorry," he said. "I am sorry for shouting and scaring you. I realize now you need someone who understands silence." There was the quiet pain in his voice, the sort of ache that comes to a man who has tried and failed, but is willing to try again for the right reasons. Anran listened. Her face held the slow curve of healing. She accepted his apology with the softness it deserved. She did not promise anything. She did not need to. Tianyi stood a step closer, hand threaded through Anran's fingers, as if it were a promise, sealed in movement rather than words. It was a low, intentional contact. He spoke not to claim victory, but to affirm presence. "I'll be here," he said. His voice was the still water of a pond in moonlight, calm, reliable. Tianwen, who had become the architect of the rule that would shape both men, watched from the doorway. "Max 10 words," she had written earlier, half joke, half strategy. The note had been a small hammer, and its strikes had reshaped Junye. He had practiced brevity until the restraint no longer felt strange, and then learned to convert restraint into a steady form of care. Junye's sacrifice had a noble angle. He chose to step back and define his love in protective brotherhood rather than disruptive passion. He vowed to be a quieter, more useful presence in Anran's life, a protector in the way his sister needed him to be, not a storm of gestures. It was at once heartbreaking and honorable. Tianyi, for his part, made no dramatic claim. He offered instead a quiet kind of future, patient, consistent, and ordinary kindness mapped across nights and mornings. The small decisive moment came later, when, in private and with soft light, he leaned and gave Anran a gentle, unobtrusive kiss that felt like an exhale. No fireworks, no claim staking, only the settling of comfort into shared space. Epilogue Part 1. 2 years later, Tianyi, Junye, Tianwen, and Anran were now sharing an off-campus apartment, with Tianyi and Junye having graduated and already gainfully employed. Tianwen and Anran were allowed a little more freedom as the two older guys were around to supervise them. Their apartment hummed in the kind of easy silence that had once felt impossible. Anran sat in her favorite corner of the living room kitchen, a soft throw tucked around her knees and a paperback lying face down beside her like a bookmark for the small pauses between tasks. The place smelled of lemon-scented dish soap and slow-brewed tea. Sunlight caught on the chipped rim of a mug Tianyi had set down, steam still rising in a thin, perfect line. He moved around them with the quiet efficiency he'd always had, placing the mug just so, setting a phone on charge with the gentleness of someone handling fragile things. Junye worked on something useful in the background, tightening a hinge, fixing a squeak, the kind of small, steady labor that had become his new language. He and Anran exchanged a glance across the room, a brief, private acknowledgement that no longer needed words. Wanbao dozed at their feet, a small living punctuation mark. The four of them, Anran, Tianyi, Junye, Tianwen, fit into the shared space without drama. The apartment's rhythm was stitched from considerate gestures, a kettle boiled and left to cool, a towel folded and handed over, a shared plate left on the counter until someone made it theirs again. It was a domestic choreography of care. Where there had once been shouting or frantic rescue, now there were hands that reached without announcing themselves, and a patience so routine it felt like air. Quiet had become more than preference for Anran. It was a cultivated architecture. She moved through it with the calm of someone whose world had finally learned how to hold her. Epilogue Part 2. 6 years since Anran's first arrived. Anran and Tianyi's wedding day arrived as a continuation of that same lesson, only made ceremonial. The iron gate of Junye's family home, once an imposing barrier that had once felt like threat, stood open in the morning light, ornate and severe, and now somehow ceremonial. Tianyi stepped out of the car with the hushed composure that had been his signature from the beginning. He wore the quiet like a suit that fit, each movement deliberate and respectful, as if he had been training for this gentleness all along. Anran, in a white dress that was quietly elegant rather than showy, stood in the doorway. Junye stood beside her, formal and composed. There was no spectacle in his posture. He looked like a man who had learned restraint the hard way, and now practiced it with dignity. For a moment, the three of them simply held a space together, memory and possibility braided in a single instant. Junye walked her to Tianyi. He met Tianyi's eyes in an exchange that needed no words, a silent, powerful transfer of care. It was an adult's negotiation, small and exact, less a handing over than an agreement, mutual and solemn. Junye's expression was not defeat so much as acceptance, a quiet resolve to be what Anran and the life around her needed him to be. There was grace in the motion, a humility that had nothing theatrical about it and everything brave. Anran took Tianyi's hand, their fingers threaded like old habits, a compact promise spoken through touch. They walked together toward the car, waiting beyond the gate, step matching step. Behind them, Junye stood for a heartbeat longer, then turned and let them go. Wanbao barked once, sharp and bright, and then settled back down as if blessing the passing. As the car eased through the iron gate, the heavy doors closed in slow, ceremonial arcs. The metal met with a soft, majestic click that sounded less like an ending and more like an answer. It was the closing of a door on the turbulence of the past and the opening of a life arranged around the rhythms Anran needed. Small gestures, steady hands, and the safe quiet of someone who would always lower the volume when the world threatened to overwhelm her. The room that remained behind the gate was full of people remade by time. Junye, who had learned to convert impulse into useful silence. Tianyi, whose steadiness had become the scaffold of a new life. Tian Wen, who had played the hard, necessary role of truth-teller and strategist. Anran, who had learned to ask for what she needed and to accept care when it came. Their lives would never be silent. Cities hum and people change. But the noise had been tamed into tolerable weather. In the hush after the gate closed, Anran breathed in that cultivated quiet and felt, finally, that she had the room she needed to breathe. The end.
You have been listening to Capturing a Quiet Beauty, written and produced by Jaclynn Toh, Du Yi Jin for AZURE SILK. About the author. Jaclynn Toh is a storyteller who finds harmony between the fact and the fiction. After a 15-year career in global treasury markets, she now dedicates her creative energy to exploring the beauty of human relationships through literature and digital art. Under the pen name Jaclynn Toh, Du Yi Jin, she crafts narratives that bridge cultural heritage with modern emotional landscapes. Copyright notice. This production is copyright 2026 by Jaclynn Toh. All rights reserved. No part of this recording or the associated story may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author. For more works and updates, visit the AZURE SILK YouTube channel or find us on Webtoon. Thank you for listening.